My sister is sleeping on a cot in a homeless shelter tonight. She thinks it's because she lost her job, her apartment, and all her friends in a string of bad luck. She has no idea I own the building she's sleeping in. She also doesn't know that her bad luck wasn't luck at all. It was a plan. And it all started the day she destroyed my wedding cake. My name is Chiquita Gresham, and for most of my 32 years, I have lived in my older sister's shadow. Brenda was the beautiful one, the popular one, the one our parents always praised. I was the quiet, nerdy girl who nobody noticed. I didn't mind. While she was busy being the star, I was busy building a life she couldn't even imagine. On my wedding day, Brenda was my maid of honor. She wore a sparkling dress and a smile that looked sweet to everyone else, but I knew better. I saw the jealousy in her eyes. She couldn't stand that I had found happiness before her, that for once, the day was about me, not her. The spotlight was on me, and she was desperate to steal it back. I had planned every detail of my wedding to perfection. The small, beautiful garden venue was filled with flowers, and the sun was shining just for me. I was marrying the kindest, most wonderful man I had ever met. A man my family had never met. I kept him a secret from them, especially from Brenda. I knew she would try to ruin it if she could. The centerpiece of the reception was the cake. It was a work of art. 3 perfect tiers of lemon sponge with raspberry filling, covered in handmade sugar flowers that looked so real you could almost smell them. It was more than a cake. It was a symbol of the sweet new life I was starting. It was a gift from my loving fiancé. Just before the reception started, Brenda walked toward the cake table, holding a glass of dark red wine. "Let me just move this for a better picture," she said loudly. Then she tripped. It happened in slow motion. The wine flew through the air, and her body slammed into the table. My beautiful cake wobbled for a second before crashing to the floor in a sticky, ruined heap. "Oh my gosh!" she screamed, covering her face with her hands. "Chiquita, I am so sorry. It was an accident." Fake tears streamed down her cheeks. But I saw it. Through her fingers, I saw her peek at the mess. And for a tiny moment, I saw her smile. She thought she had won. She thought she had shattered my perfect day. She thought she had ruined a simple cake from a random bakery. She had no idea who the caterer was. She didn't know that the man who had spent 60 hours creating that masterpiece was standing just a few feet away, watching the whole thing. The man she had never met. The man who was my husband. What Brenda did next was unthinkable, but what my husband did moments later left the entire room speechless. The story of how my sister ended up in a homeless shelter that I own will shock you. If you want to see exactly how this revenge plays out, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss Chapter 2. We'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop your city or state in the comments below. But as Brenda stood over my ruined dream, wiping away her fake tears, she didn't see my new husband walking up behind her. He wasn't angry. He was smiling. And in his hand, he was holding a security camera. Brenda stared at the device in my husband's hand, her fake tears drying on her cheeks. She expected him to be a simple baker, angry about his ruined work. But Marco wasn't angry. He was calm, and his smile was the scariest thing I had ever seen. He looked like a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. "That was quite a fall," Marco said, his voice soft and steady. "You must be hurt." Brenda nodded, ready to launch back into her act. "I'm just so clumsy," she cried. Marco's smile widened. "Yes. So clumsy. I got it all on camera. I have cameras all over the kitchen and reception area to protect my work." This wasn't the first time Brenda had used fake tears to ruin my life. I suddenly remembered my high school prom. She had accidentally spilled a drink on my dress, crying that she was sorry, all while my date was telling her how sweet and caring she was. He ended up leaving with her that night. She never just takes things. She destroys your happiness while pretending to be an angel. Marco turned the screen so only Brenda could see it. It was a video, played in slow motion. It showed her looking around to see if anyone was watching. It showed the tiny, wicked smirk on her face just before she lunged toward the table. It showed that her trip was no accident. It was a perfectly planned attack. The color drained from Brenda's face. The mask of the sad, clumsy victim fell away, and for a second, I saw the real her, a scared, hateful person trapped in a lie. She looked from the screen to Marco, her eyes wide with panic. She had been caught, and she knew it. What would she do now that her favorite trick had failed? Just then, our mother rushed over, pushing past me to wrap her arms around Brenda. "Oh, my poor baby. Are you okay? Don't worry about the cake," she said, coddling her like a child. My father followed, patting Brenda's back. They didn't even look at me, the bride whose wedding was just attacked. Seeing our parents by her side, Brenda got a little of her confidence back. She looked at Marco with a nasty glare. "You wouldn't dare show anyone," she whispered, thinking she was in control. "Our parents would never believe you over me. You would only ruin the wedding further." She thought she could still win. Marco leaned in close, his voice a low whisper that only she could hear. "Oh, Brenda," he said, and the sweetness in his voice was gone, replaced by ice. "You think this is about a cake? You think I care about embarrassing you? This is about every tear you ever made my wife cry. The cake was just your final mistake." He then turned away from her, leaving her standing there, frozen with fear. He walked toward our parents, who were still fussing over their favorite daughter. I held my breath, wondering what he was about to do. Was this how my wedding day would be remembered? With a giant, public family fight? Marco put on his kindest face and looked at my mother. "Please, don't worry about a thing," he said smoothly. "The cake is gone, but I have a much better surprise for everyone. It's a special tribute video I made for my beautiful bride, Chiquita. Would you all like to see it?" A large projector screen lowered from the ceiling. The wedding guests murmured with excitement, thinking it was a sweet surprise. My parents looked so proud. But I saw Brenda's face. She was pale, her hands trembling. She thought her world was about to see the video of her pushing the cake. She was wrong. Marco's plan was so much smarter. The video began, and my heart sank a little. It was just a slideshow of old photos. Me and Brenda as kids, playing in the yard. Me on my first day of school. Brenda at her prom. For a moment, it looked like a normal, boring wedding tribute. Brenda let out a tiny sigh of relief and shot me a look that said, "You see? He's nothing." I was confused. Had I imagined the cold threat in Marco's voice? Was this all just a way to scare her and then move on? I trusted my husband, but I couldn't understand his plan. Why show all these happy photos? It felt like he was letting her get away with it. But then, the music changed, and an unfamiliar face appeared on the screen. It was my old high school principal. He was smiling warmly. "I was so happy to hear about Chiquita's wedding," he said. "I'll never forget the day we awarded her the state university's biggest science scholarship. We had never seen a student with so much talent and potential." The room filled with polite applause. I glanced at Brenda. Her face was frozen in a horrified smile. She had spent an entire summer telling our family that the principal made a mistake, that the scholarship was actually for her, and that I had somehow stolen it. She had painted me as a thief. Now, here was the principal himself, telling the truth to 100 people. Before Brenda could even think of an excuse, the video cut to a new person. It was Mrs. Gable, the sweet old woman who runs the local animal shelter. Brenda loved to post photos of herself there, acting like she was the shelter's biggest supporter. Mrs. Gable was crying on screen. "I'm not supposed to say who it was," she said, "but our anonymous donor who saved us from closing is here today." It was Chiquita. The guests gasped. They looked at me, then at Brenda, whose face was now bright red. Her entire public image was built on lies, and Marco was pulling them apart, thread by thread, in front of everyone. She wasn't just a clumsy girl who ruined a cake. She was a fraud who had spent her life trying to dim my light. The video ended with a beautiful recent photo of Marco and me on the beach, laughing. The guests were cheering, but they were also whispering, connecting the dots. They were finally seeing the real me, and the real Brenda. Her perfect world was cracking, and the foundation was about to collapse. Marco picked up the microphone again, his arm wrapped tightly around me. "That's my wife," he said, his voice full of pride. The crowd clapped even louder. He waited for the noise to die down, his eyes never leaving my sister's. Then, his happy expression vanished. He looked directly at Brenda, and his voice boomed through the speakers, cold and hard. "So why don't you tell us, Brenda, why you believe a woman like that doesn't deserve any of this? Why did you tell me she was making the biggest mistake of her life by marrying me?" The silence in the room was so heavy you could feel it. 100 pairs of eyes were locked on my sister, waiting for her to answer Marco's question. Brenda, for the first time in her life, had no words. The spotlight she always wanted was now burning her alive. She opened her mouth, but only a small, choked sound came out. Then, she did what she always does when she is caught. She began to cry. Not the fake, gentle tears from before, but huge, angry sobs. She pointed a trembling finger at Marco. "Who is this man?" she shrieked at me. "Who is this monster you brought here to hurt me? To ruin your own wedding just to make me look bad?" Her words were a poison dart, meant to turn me into the villain. And for some of the guests, it started to work. They saw a crying woman being attacked by a stranger. My own mother rushed forward, her face a mask of fury. "Get away from my daughter," she screamed at Marco. "You have done enough. This is a family matter." The guests started whispering. The tide was turning. My mother and sister stood together, a team of victims, while Marco and I looked like the cruel bullies. I felt a familiar sting of helplessness. This was my life. No matter what Brenda did, our mother would protect her, and I would be left alone in the shadows. But not this time. Something inside me snapped. I stepped forward, right between my mother and my husband. "Stop," I said. My voice didn't feel like my own. It was strong and steady. "Stop protecting her, Mom. The only person who got hurt today was me. The only person who is always hurt is me. And you have always let it happen." My mother froze, shocked that I had finally talked back to her. But as I looked at her, I saw my father standing behind her. He wasn't angry or defensive. He was pale as a ghost, staring at the floor with a look of deep, painful shame on his face. A strange question popped into my head. What did he know? This was the open loop Marco had created. Suddenly, this was about more than just a ruined cake or a stolen scholarship. It was about a secret my father was hiding. A secret that made him look guilty. I suddenly realized that Brenda's jealousy might not be the whole story. There was something else. Something much bigger. Marco's calm voice cut through the tension. "You are right," he said to my mother. "This is a family matter. And since I am now Chiquita's husband, I am family." He looked from my mother to my father, who still refused to lift his head. "And I think it's time we finally talked about this family's biggest secret." My mother laughed, a short, ugly sound. "This family has no secrets. We are a good, honest family," she declared, though her eyes flickered nervously toward my father. His shame was so obvious now, so heavy in the air. What in the world did he do that was connected to Brenda's actions? Marco smiled, a cold, empty smile that sent a shiver down my spine. He pulled out his phone. "Good," he said. "Then you won't mind if I call my lawyer. He's waiting outside with some paperwork about the family business. The papers from 10 years ago, when your husband signed his retirement over to Brenda. The ones with your forged signature on them, Dad." At Marco's words, every head in the room swiveled to look at my father. He stumbled backward as if he'd been physically hit. His face, which was already pale, turned the color of ash. My mother grabbed his arm, trying to keep him steady, but her own confident expression was gone, replaced by a flickering look of fear. "Frank, "This is ridiculous," my mother said, but her voice was shaking. "Tell this man he is a liar. Tell everyone what a good, honest man you are." She was pleading with him, not just to save his honor, but to save the perfect family image she had spent her life building. My father, however, could not speak. He stared at Marco, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, he whispered a question that shattered my entire world. How did you know?" It wasn't a denial. It was a confession. A gasp swept through the room. My mother let go of his arm as if it had burned her. "Frank," she whispered in horror. Tears began to stream down my father's face. He finally turned to look at me, and the shame in his eyes was so deep it felt like a physical weight. "I'm so sorry, Chiquita," he cried, his voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. But I had to. It was the only way to fix Brenda's mistake." A mistake. My mind was spinning. What could Brenda have done that was so terrible? What kind of mistake requires a father to steal from one child to give to the other? Suddenly, my whole life felt like a lie. Every time I was told I was less than Brenda, was it because they were covering something up? I realized this was never about simple jealousy. It was about a secret. A deep, dark family secret that I was the only one who didn't know. The secret was the reason for Brenda's hatred, my mother's blindness, and my father's guilt. They weren't just a family with a favorite child. They were co-conspirators in a crime against me. Brenda, seeing that my father was about to break completely, dropped her act. The tears vanished, and her face became a mask of pure fury and terror. "Don't you dare say it, Dad!" she screamed, her voice raw. You promised you would take that secret to your grave." The guests were leaning forward in their seats, their faces a mix of shock and fascination. My aunt, my mother's sister, stood up. "Frank, what secret?" she demanded. "What in God's name is she talking about?" My family was imploding in front of a live audience, and I was just as clueless as they were. Marco stepped forward and put a comforting hand on my shoulder. He looked at my father, not with anger, but with a strange sadness. "He can't tell you," Marco said to my aunt, his voice echoing in the silent room. "He's too afraid. He's been protecting her for far too long." Then, Marco's calm expression hardened as he turned his gaze to the venue's large double doors. "But her victims aren't afraid to talk," he said loudly and clearly. "And neither are the police officers who have been waiting in the lobby. They have a warrant, Dad. A warrant for Brenda's arrest for fraud and embezzlement." As if on cue, the grand doors of the reception hall swung open. 2 police officers stepped inside, their calm presence sucking all the air out of the room. The music had stopped long ago, but now, even the whispers died. The only sound was the clicking of their shoes on the polished floor as they walked toward my family. Brenda's face went completely white. She looked from the officers to Marco and then to me, her eyes filled with a new kind of terror. This was not part of her plan. In her world, she was the star who never faced real consequences. But the consequences were now walking right toward her. "No!" my mother shrieked, jumping in front of Brenda like a shield. "You can't take her. She did nothing wrong. This is his fault." She pointed a wild, accusing finger at Marco. "He's a liar. He set this all up to destroy my daughter." The officers looked at her with blank, professional faces, completely unmoved by her drama. One officer gently but firmly moved my mother aside. "Brenda Gresham," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You are under arrest in connection with the embezzlement of funds from the Gresham and Sons bakery, dating back 10 years. He reached behind his back and pulled out a pair of shiny, silver handcuffs. My heart was pounding. Embezzlement from the family business? The secret was worse than I could have imagined. But the second officer didn't even look at Brenda. He walked right past her, toward a table in the corner where my father's old business partner sat. A sweet, frail man everyone called Uncle Phil. The officer knelt beside the old man's chair so he could look him in the eye. "We got her, Phil," the officer said gently. We have the bank records. We know she was the one who stole your retirement savings." The whole room turned to stare at dear Uncle Phil, who had been like a grandfather to me. He simply nodded, his eyes filled with a deep, quiet sadness. And then, finally, the whole dark, twisted puzzle clicked together in my mind. Brenda had stolen the life savings of the man who helped my father build his business. To stop Phil from pressing charges and sending her to prison, my father had paid him back. He had used his retirement savings and my inheritance. My father fell into a nearby chair, his body shaking with sobs. "He was going to ruin us," he cried out to the silent, watching guests. "She took everything from him. I had to pay it back to keep him quiet. It was the only way to save her, to save the family name. He had saved the family's name by sacrificing my future." The officer finally placed the handcuffs around Brenda's wrists. The sharp click echoed through the room. She stopped fighting and stood strangely still, her face unreadable. The beautiful maid of honor, the perfect daughter, was now a prisoner at her sister's wedding. Her reign was finally over. But as they started to lead her away, she turned and looked directly at me. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a pure, black hatred. A horrifying smile spread across her lips. "This changes nothing, Chiquita," she hissed. "This isn't the real secret. Ask Daddy what he was doing the night the old bakery burned down. Ask him who he was really protecting." The heavy doors clicked shut, and Brenda was gone. But her final hateful words seemed to echo in the silent room. "Ask Dad about the fire." My wedding guests stood frozen, watching my family's complete destruction. This was no longer a party. It was the scene of an emotional earthquake, and we were all standing in the rubble. A fire. I remembered it now. The original bakery, the little shop on Main Street my father and Uncle Phil started together. It burned down about 10 years ago, not long after Brenda stole the money. The official story was faulty wiring. An old building, a tragic accident. No one ever questioned it. But Brenda's words painted it in a sinister new light. I walked on numb legs over to my father, who was slumped in his chair. The shame on his face was now mixed with a raw, animal fear. "Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What fire was she talking about? What happened?" He flinched, refusing to look at me. "She's lying," he cried, his voice cracking. "It was an accident. A terrible accident. She's just a monster trying to bring everyone down with her." His denial was too fast, too loud. It wasn't the response of an innocent man. It was the panicked scream of a guilty one. I knew in that moment that he was lying again. Suddenly, my mother was in front of me, her body blocking my view of my father. Her face was a cold, hard mask. "You will stop this right now, Chiquita," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "You have torn this family apart. Leave him alone." Why was she so desperate to stop me from asking about the fire? My blood ran cold. She knew. Of course she knew. This wasn't just my father protecting Brenda. My mother was his accomplice. They had been partners in this deception for a decade, building a wall of lies around me. The betrayal was so deep, so complete, it felt like I couldn't breathe. Marco stepped to my side, his hand finding mine. His presence was the only thing keeping me upright. He looked at my parents, his expression calm but unforgiving. "That's interesting," he said, his voice cutting through their panic. "Because the fire inspector who ruled it an accident retired a week later." My parents froze, their eyes locked on Marco. He continued. "He moved to a new state and bought a very nice house on a lake. Paid for it in cash. My investigator found it all. Someone paid a lot of money to make sure that fire looked like an accident." My mother's face went slack with shock. They thought they had buried the secret forever. My father made a small, choking sound. The lies were catching up to him, and he had nowhere left to run. What could possibly be so bad that it was worth committing another crime, another cover-up, just to hide it? What was in that old building? Just when I thought the silence would break me, A frail voice spoke from the corner. It was Uncle Phil, who had managed to stand up, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked at my father, not with anger, but with a profound, heartbreaking disappointment. "Tell her the truth, Frank," he said, his voice trembling. "Tell her about the other set of books. The ones that proved Brenda wasn't the only one stealing from me." Uncle Phil's accusation hung in the dead air. Brenda wasn't the only thief. My mother stared at my father, a new kind of confusion and horror spreading across her face. It seemed this was one secret she had not been told. "Frank," she whispered. "What is he talking about?" My father looked up, his face a landscape of complete and utter defeat. "He's right," my father said, his voice so quiet it was almost swallowed by the silence. "I was also taking money. 4 years." He finally looked at my mother, his eyes begging her to understand. "It was for you. When you were sick. The treatments the insurance wouldn't cover. We were about to lose everything. I couldn't let that happen." My mother sank into a chair, a hand flying to her mouth. She knew they had struggled with her medical bills, but she never knew where the money to pay them had truly come from. She was a beneficiary of his crime. This was why she defended him, why she ignored his flaws. They were both trapped in the same lie. I stared at him, my own father. He wasn't just a weak man who caved to his favorite daughter. He was a criminal. He stole, and he lied, and he built our family on a foundation of secrets. His motive wasn't pure. It was stained with the same selfishness that ran through my sister's veins. But how did this connect to Brenda? I asked, needing to hear the final, ugly piece of the story. My father wouldn't look at me. "She found my ledger," he said, his voice flat and dead. "The book where I kept track of the cash I took. She found it just after Uncle Phil discovered what she had done. The full, monstrous picture finally came into view." "She blackmailed you," I stated. It wasn't a question. He simply nodded. "She said if I didn't pay Phil off and make it all go away, she would tell everyone about my book. We would both go to prison. So I used the retirement fund. I used your future to save us both." This was the truth. The real, rotten core of my family. My sister, a thief and a blackmailer. My father, a thief and a coward. My mother, a willing accomplice who chose to live in a comfortable lie rather than face a hard truth. They were a trio of criminals, and I was the silent partner whose assets they had stolen. "And the fire?" Marco asked quietly, his voice cutting through my father's pathetic sobs. "The fire," my father confessed, "was to burn my ledger. I started it myself. I thought if the proof was gone, the secret would be buried forever." He had just confessed to arson in a room full of witnesses. I looked at the weeping, broken people who had raised me. I felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, not even pity. It was like looking at strangers. The years of pain had been cauterized by the fire of the truth, leaving behind only a calm, empty clarity. I was finally free of them. Marco came to my side and took my hand, his touch the only real thing in the room. "The officers are still outside," he whispered, for my ears only. "You heard him confess. What do you want to do?" I looked at my father's bowed head, then turned to my husband, my true family. "Tell them to come back in," I said, my voice steady and strong. "I have another crime to report." Marco gave me a small, sad nod and walked toward the entrance hall where the officers were waiting. My mother watched him go, her face pale with disbelief. She finally understood that I was not making an empty threat. The time for hiding was over. The time for consequences had arrived. She scrambled toward me, her hands grabbing my wedding dress. "No, Chiquita, you can't," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "He's your father. He made mistakes, but he did it to protect me, to protect this family. You can't do this to him." She was trying to guilt me one last time, using the word family like a weapon. I looked down at her, at the woman who chose a comfortable lie over her own daughter, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty space where my love for her used to be. You stopped being a family when you decided my future was the price to pay for your secrets, I said, my voice cold and final. I gently removed her hands from my dress. The officers walked back into the room. The remaining guests watched, frozen, as the lead officer stopped in front of me. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "you have another crime to report." I met his gaze, my back straight, my voice steady. This was the hardest and most necessary moment of my life. I looked past the officer to my father, who was watching me with dead eyes. "Yes, officer," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "In front of everyone here, my father, Frank Gresham, has just confessed to arson. He admitted to burning down his own business to destroy evidence of a crime." A terrible, wounded sound escaped my mother's throat. She collapsed into a chair, her face in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. The officers walked to my father. He didn't protest or beg. He simply stood up and held out his wrists, accepting his fate. He had run out of lies. As they put the handcuffs on him, my father looked at me one last time. There was no anger there, only a profound and endless regret. He mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." I gave a single, sharp nod. Sorry was a start, but it could not rebuild the life his choices had destroyed. After my father was escorted out, the room emptied in a flood of uncomfortable silence. Guests who had come for a celebration fled from the wreckage of my family. In the end, it was just Marco and me, standing alone in our beautiful ruined reception hall, the sweet smell of our smashed wedding cake filling the air. That day was a year ago. It was an ending, but it was also a beginning. My father and sister are both in prison, paying for their crimes. My mother now lives as a ghost in the big empty house her husband's lies had paid for. She has everything she wanted, and she has nothing at all. Today, Marco and I are getting married again, just the two of us on a beach. A real wedding, built on truth. But as I was putting on my dress this morning, the mail arrived. In it was a single envelope with a prison stamp. On the back, in my sister's angry handwriting, were 7 words. "There is still one more secret." I stood in my simple white dress, holding the letter from prison. Outside, I could hear the gentle waves of the ocean and see Marco waiting for me on the sand. My first instinct was to tear the letter up, to not let Brenda's poison touch this perfect day. But I knew I had to face it. This was the final chapter, and I had to read the last page. My hands were steady as I opened the envelope. A year ago, they would have been trembling. But I was not that person anymore. The letter was short, written in Brenda's angry, slanted handwriting. "I bet you think you've won," it began. "But I saved the best secret for last. The one Dad was always too scared to tell you." I kept reading, my heart calm. "He felt so guilty about stealing your inheritance," Brenda wrote, "but the joke was on you the whole time. He couldn't legally give it to you anyway. Because he's not your real father." I read the words again. Not my father. The letter explained that my mother had a brief affair with a man she truly loved, but he died in an accident before I was born. Heartbroken, she married Frank Gresham, who agreed to raise me as his own. But he never loved me. He always saw me as a reminder of my mother's secret, and that's why he let Brenda hurt me. Brenda wrote those words to break me. She thought learning I wasn't a real Gresham would be the ultimate pain. She thought it would make me feel worthless and alone, like an outsider who never belonged. She wanted to shatter my identity. But she had no idea what a beautiful gift she had just given me. A sound bubbled up from my chest. I started to laugh. It wasn't a cry, and it wasn't a scream. It was a loud, happy, and joyous laugh of pure freedom. The money they stole wasn't mine. The name they shamed wasn't mine. The blood in my veins wasn't theirs. The very last chain that connected me to their dark and twisted world had just been broken. I was free. Completely and truly free. They had no power over me anymore. I walked to a candle that was burning on a nearby table, a small flame dancing in the light. I held the corner of the letter to the fire. I watched as Brenda's hate, my father's lies, and my mother's secrets all turned into weightless grey ash. I looked at myself in the mirror. I wasn't Chiquita Gresham, the sad, quiet girl who lived in the shadows. I was just Chiquita, a woman who had survived, a woman who was loved, a woman who was finally happy. My past was gone, and my future was waiting. With a smile on my face, I opened the door and walked out onto the sunny beach. My real family, my wonderful husband Marco, was waiting for me. He took my hand, and together, we walked toward the ocean to begin our new life. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't the fighting or the anger. It was letting go and being truly happy. My story shows that even from the deepest betrayals, you can find the strength to build a new life based on truth and love. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of justice and empowerment. Thank you for watching.